Please, may I ask councillors, just some feedback for you, just to make sure that your microphones are turned on when you start to speak, and if you would talk directly into them so everybody can hear, particularly those who are watching from afar. Mobile phones, please, off, and store them away so that they're not, you're not tempted to use them during our meeting, and I will ensure that we take breaks so that you can check your messages. Apologies, please, this morning. We do have an apology from Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Sturt. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, that our apologies be accepted? Thank you, Councillor Gord. Thank you, Your Worship. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Declarations of interest? Yes, Mr. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I declare an interest in the speed limit review and won't take part in that debate.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kent. So noted. Urgent items on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Can I signal the intention to raise an item in confidentiality and confidential regarding an event that requires consideration by this committee to support an urgent application to the by the hosting committee?
Right. Yes, I have been made aware of that. So it wasn't on the agenda, and there is some urgency. I understand that the bids close next week. Is that correct? Right.
That's correct.
So this is really just to consider that. Thank you. I'm happy to take that in urgent items. Thank you. But I will need.
I'll move in a second.
Sorry.
I'll move in a second.
Oh, thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Her Worship. That the request that Council consider supporting a bid to host a major international sporting event be dealt with in the public excluded session of this meeting. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Contrary? Kia ora. Thank you. Now we have confirmation of 2 minutes this morning. Minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 10th of May 2018. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Ms Mohi. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Are there any corrections? No corrections, thank you. Beg your pardon? Oh, there is one correction. Beg your pardon, I didn't look up there. Delete Councillor Hunt's name. Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I'll have 2 of you. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you. It has been moved and seconded by Ms Mohi, moved and seconded by Councillor Gould. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Confirmation of the minutes. Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held, this is for the long-term plan deliberations held on the 16th and 17th of May 2018. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Any corrections, please? Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Now, page 26 in our reports there, recommendation 1. The Alexander Road Reserve, change of reserve classification. I'll have a mover and a seconder, please. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Thomas. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. It has been moved and seconded that the report, Alexander Road Reserve, change of a reserve classification be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried, thank you. Good morning, Morena Korua.
Morena, Madam Chair and councillors and board members. And look, my role today will simply be to introduce Stephanie Kelly, who's our recreation planner, who will very briefly take you through the report and will be available for any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Essentially, the purpose of this report is to enable the classification of Alexander Road Reserve in Lake Tarawera to be changed from local purpose play centre to local purpose community. And the reason for that is to enable the Lake Tarawera Community Group to use the hall for the purposes of a community hall. Further to a resolution by Council in March, we undertook a community consultation process. We had a really strong response to that with 70 submissions, 66 of which were in support. A few concerns were raised, which we will address through the lease conditions in terms of restricting hours of operation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, rather than a question, I'd just like to note that I'd like to move this motion when we get to that stage.
Thank you. Yes, Your Worship.
And it's not a question from me either. I'm just pleased you can sort out some of the aspects through the lease. But I'd like to acknowledge the work that I was very aware of Fred Stevens undertaking, and I'm sure Mr Thomas would have mentioned it. I was around as a play centre rep when this was a play centre, but sadly no longer needed in that community, but definitely the space is sorely needed, and this has taken a long time to sort out. It's surprising how we're not as flexible as we want to be, but I'm very glad it's gone back to the community and that the community's had the chance to say whether, you know, how valuable is this asset to them. So the consultation there was a very important step in a process, but it made it an extraordinarily long time. I remember this brought to us in 2013 to sort out, so it shows you how long it takes. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Oh yes, Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move number 2 because there has already been a huge number of community sorry?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'll second it, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Because his name's not up there yet.
No, that's fine.
There has been a huge number of community meetings there already, and with the long-term plan process, it has worked very, very successful having a community hall based in Tarawera for the residents to turn up. And on at least, and including the sewerage committee, they've had over 100 residents attend that hall, and the members there have taken it to heart that they own the building now, and they are looking at improving different facilities in it and making it a worthwhile centre for all the residents to use.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. Yes, it's responding to what the community see as being best use for it now, so thank you for that. Thank you, councillors. It's been moved by Mr Thomas, seconded by Councillor Gould. So I will put that motion that the committee recommends to council to change the classification of part of Alexander Road Reserve, being lot 144 DP 36908, from local purpose play centre reserve to local purpose community reserve, pursuant to section 241 of the Reserves Act 1977 by notice in the New Zealand Gazette. I'll put that motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Page 31, the speed limit bylaw, changes to speed limits, and it's noted, Councillor Kent, that, sorry, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't take part in this, but I would like it noted that on page 44, the minutes of the speed limit bylaw review, it's noted there that I put in an apology. It should be noted that my apology was because I'd put in a notice of conflict of interest.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, can we have that noted? Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. Right, I'd call for a mover and a seconder to receive the report, speed limit bylaw changes to speed limits, and adopt the minutes of the speed limit bylaws hearing. So there's that one, there's the report to be received, and also the minutes. So those are being combined. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Morena Rotorua, good morning, welcome. You're doing the presentation this morning, is that correct?
Marina, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, just to recap, speed limits are set under Council's bylaw for setting of speed limits, which is a special consultative process under the Local Government Act. It needs to be consistent with the national guidelines or rule, really, on setting speed limits. So we've been out to the public, we've consulted with the public, we've had hearings, we've gone out and looked at all of the roads and measured actual speeds. The main difference between the current or the new rule and the old rule is that speed limits are meant to be consistent with the actual speed environment of the road. So previously it was sort of a blanket. It was 50, 100, or there were some intermediate ones. So now we've gone and looked at the actual speeds, and what we're recommending is consistent with the measured speeds on the roads. So we want to step through them one by one?
Oh, I don't think so. No. Some of them are very minor, actually. No, we won't step through them one by one. That's not necessary. Sorry, Your Worship.
A question, Mr. Dine, is there any that you think that there was community conflict, or,
No, I think what we're recommending is very consistent with what was proposed at the actual hearings. We've tried to put a bit of common sense into it, like for Vaughan Road, for example, the one submitter suggested that we didn't leave a section of 70 in the middle, so we've made it 50 all the way. We were very mindful of NZTA's submission about not supporting a 70-kilometre zone. So the Hamarana Road is a good example of that, where we've changed that to 60s and 80s. One of the things we wanted to do is not have a lot of changes, but in cases like Hamarana, you can't avoid it if 70 is not an option. So that's a mix of 60s and 80s. Since the hearing, we've actually gone out and measured some additional points on the roads, like on Manawahei Road or Pongakawa Valley Road, the section between Kennedy Bay and Otautu Bay, which the submitter suggested be lower than our original proposed 80. We've made that 60 because that's the actual speed that people are travelling at. So looking at all, I think we're very consistent with both the rule, the actual speeds and the submissions that have been made. So,
and one other little question.
Yes, certainly.
Was Oakeri Falls, I know that was part of the Safer Journeys consultation, but is there no change in the speed limit there?
Well, that's on a state highway, so that's not our jurisdiction. We would be a interested party in making submissions on it, but currently that is still with the Safer Journeys team.
And when do we hear that time frame?
Not sure. Don't know.
Thank you. At some stage I will, I'm going to just put the motion, but I'm happy to have some discussion now. But we have deliberated these, as you know. We had an excellent presentation from NZTA. So, yes, so I'm happy to, but they're not going to be hashed about again. So just to give you that a warning. Thank you. Mr. Berryman Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this. Actually, my question is why these roads? And where I'm getting to is from the information, I'm not aware if there's a particular rationale behind these roads or all rural roads or...
Okay. So, as I noted, this is a change of bylaw, or we do it under the bylaw, so it's quite an involved process. So traditionally what Council has done is just kept a list of submissions that the public make through annual plan or letters or whatever, where people have asked us in the previous 3 years where they would like the speed limit reviewed. So it simply comes from the public, and we've kept a list. Having said that, going forward, and particularly with the new rule and NZTA requiring us over several years to phase out all our existing 70s, I would suggest in the next round we look at all of the roads that are currently 70 and review them, along with any that we get from the public.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, a number of these roads are in the Lakes Community Board area. There are just a couple I want to comment on, and one of them is Hamarana Road, and I was very disappointed about NZTA's submission on not supporting a 70k limit along there. Seems an ideological quest on their part rather than anything to do with road safety. And It was a very simple solution for Hamarana Road to make it 70k from one end to the other. Dropping it to 80, going between 80 and 60 makes it a lot more difficult. Just the one thing I would like to suggest, that there is a section in the middle of Hamarana Road at the moment that jumps back up to 80k since these new suggested speeds have been put out. The people I've managed to talk to out at Hamarana have all supported it being 60k all the way through. So rather than having this little section that's only about 1 kilometre long in the middle, jump back up to 80k. And that's the area around, sorry. I've lost it on here now.
Around Te Wairega?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. It's a small section that we've got set at 80k. I think the community support is actually for 60k there, so it is pretty well 60k all the way through till you get to the two bookends of 80k at the end of the road. So I would like to suggest that we amend that to 60k, that section, rather than 80.
How feasible is that to do that, Mr. Dine?
Because
we've already signalled these to NZTA, is that correct? Did we put these to them as well on our recommendation?
No, I think NZTA, if we suggest a 70, they'll probably potentially object. If we put in a mix of 60s and 80s, they won't. What that will mean, though, that section is relatively open. People will tend to travel above 60 on it at any rate. So what it means is that we have to do some engineering or some reinforcement of the speed limits to try and get people to comply. That's in the rule also. You can't just set a speed limit that people are travelling double the speed. So it's while it's feasible to do that, it probably does mean that we'll have to put up additional signage, or we can't put speed humps out there to slow people down, but we could put up some large signage to reinforce that the speed limit at this point is 60. But I don't think NZTA would object.
It does seem to make sense, doesn't it?
Well, of course, there's that little bit in the middle by Wilson's Bay that we had as 60 any rate, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that little bit of road. The visibility out of Wilson's Bay is almost zero, so we couldn't make that 80. That would be just, it's currently 70, so dropping that to 60 seemed to make sense. And so, you know, what talking about there is the gap between there and Hamarana sort of village, making that 60, which is I'm sure you all know, is a relatively open, straightish bit of road that people won't travel 60 at.
No, that's true. So currently it's, so in this instance, could
well, it's up to the committee. The committee can make the decision to make it 60, or recommend it be 60.
Right, thank you. Well, thank you. I'll just ask if there is support for that one. I mean, I know exactly where you're talking about, and I can see that. So it's something that, bearing in mind there might be some changes that you just mentioned that would have to occur. But I'm happy to, if the majority of the committee council seem to. Yes, certainly, because I don't want to setting a precedence and we deliberate again.
Through the chair, and I've had quite a few discussions over the time with regard to setting of speed limits, and I'd just like Mr. Dine to just talk a little bit more about this. The key thing about speed limits is that they're being set on the basis of looking at a problem, looking at the issues of the surrounding area, and setting the speed limit at a level which is commensurate with the road and the conditions and the issues that piece of road presents. The problem with setting speed limits, as I understand it, lower than what it would appear obvious to any driver moving through that piece of road, is that if the road looks and presents as an area which does not have significant safety issues, is straight, does not have concerns with regards to pedestrian movement and so on that are clear, then drivers don't stick to that level. So it is important that road speed limits are matched to the situation in which those limits are actually being applied. The argument, I think, is one to be cautious on, that it doesn't make sense to go transverse through different speed limits, because in doing so, those are different speed limits. The problem is with that is that if the road is naturally, and the conditions are naturally amenable to different speeds, then the speed limit should logically follow.
Right. Clear as. Thank you for that, thank you. Yes, now, with that one there.
If Peter could maybe comment.
Yes,
that's quite correct. The basis of the new rule, or the intention of the new rule, is to match the actual limit with the speed environment, and take into account safety issues and potential risk. And that section of road is, as I say, open. There is no schools or other risk factors on it. And as I say, drivers will tend to travel what they think is the speed limit, just by looking at the surroundings.
Thank you. I'm after hearing Jeff's explanation and yours. I'm more inclined to leave it as has been recommended, but you'd like a comment on that, Mr. Thomas, and then I'm going to move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, look, I'd just like to point out this is 1 kilometre approximately in the middle of 260k areas, and if we start setting our speed limits in terms of the road conditions kilometre by kilometre, we would have an absolute mess in our area. So I think that there is a strong argument for having it 60 all the way through.
Thank you. Are there comments on this section of road, please?
Yes, and I have a question.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I note on one of the submissions, number 18, they spoke about the bus stop at on Hamarana Road near Tiwaringa, and it was 100. And I wondered, and it's obviously now being dropped, but for me, while that is a straight road, there is the golf course, then there's the Springs, then there's the bridge, then there's Tiwaringa Road, and then there's some very, very sharp corners. So while I support, yes, the capacity of the road, it is an area that people do, camper vans and day trippers go into that park, and if some road narrowing, whether it's by paint or signage, could be done in that small kilometre, then I think that would actually mitigate the fact that the road looks like you can speed on it. And I guess the question around the bus stop is, how fast is too fast going past a bus stop?
Yeah, just the bus stop is actually in that little, it's actually an old bit of road, so it's actually off the road.
Thank you, Ms Mohi.
I just want to support what you've said, Councillor Hunt. Also, I've lived in that area for over 30 years, and that stretch has been a stretch that it's well travelled, well walked. Just want to remind Council that they are doing a lot of upgrade work on the reserve, so it will be used further. There is discussion to come around freedom camping ability in the future, so there's going to be a lot more traffic happening in that area. The bridge is pretty crazy in summer. It's and it's something that the Ngāti Rangi we have been advocating for a long time to bring the speed down in that area, and I know that the community feel the same way. It's a well-used piece of work, so I support the statements around using alternative methods such as paint, yes, stripes, signage. So I actually support what's being proposed here.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Can I just say, just to clarify, the bridge, and we know that there's been an issue with the bridge for a long time, but that's in the proposed 60 any rate. Yeah.
Is it in regard to this one? Thank you. If it's on regard to this one, yes. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually quite happy with how it is at the moment, and reason being is I travel on that road every day, and I actually think that if we think about the risk of changing it, there'll be an increase of risk of cars trying to pass each other. So I'm not quite sure if we're really going to achieve what we're wanting to, and I just think we should be quite cautious of what we're trying to achieve, and also the precedent that we're going to set in other parts of land. I mean, already there are some arguments that on that strip on Hamurana being proposed down to 60 kilometres per hour, how many other roads in Rotorua do we have with residential only on one side, reserve on the other, that we've reduced down to 60 kilometres per hour? So I'm quite happy to have it as it is. There are no other passing lanes anywhere near that, so that is the hotspot where people pass. I understand that in future we are going to be having developments, but in future we'll also be having many other speed change reviews. So I'd just like to air my concerns from the other side, and that I think it is quite fine as it is. And actually, I agree it should go down to 60 for that area highlighted currently. I think even then we're still going to have issues of people travelling a lot faster than that 60, and that will be one stretch that I think will have increased risk. So it's really, what are we trying to achieve with this?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's good to hear from Ms Mohi and Councillor Tapsell, because they're using the road every day, so they're very familiar with it. Thank you very much. So in that case, I think we'll just leave that as is. Councillors, we'll just leave it as per the recommendation here. Councillor Gould.
When you mention Oakland Place and Pioneer Road with going to 50k, does it also cover Brookdale Drive and Streamdale Place, which are opposite those particular streets?
Yeah, well, Brookdale is already 50. There was, because Pioneer and Oakland are relatively new subdivisions. There was a bit of debate with NZTA whether they were already defaulted as 50. But I included it just to make sure, because we'd never actually gone through a process of gazetting those as 50. And they've just taken the adjacent speed limit on Western Road, which was 70. So it was, NZTA actually said we didn't need to do this because they're residential subdivisions. Under the rule they default as 50 any rate. But I just wanted to include them for clarity, really. But Brookdale is already 50. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
That was the easiest way I've thought of describing it, but what it is essentially what it means is that it's going to be 80 down to the start of the village and Spencer Road, including Landing Road. Okay, the section past the Blue Lake, there's a small section of 50 any rate because of the people there in the summer, and they've got a bend and lots of people, so it's we did that last time, the 50. The other section of Spencer Road is sort of between the two parts of the village, much further down in the village. Sort of halfway through, there's a section with very few houses, and it's currently 100. And the community have long complained about that 100 section, so we're suggesting that section be lowered. And we've measured the actual speeds along there, and people don't travel anywhere near 100 at any rate. So we can put the map up if you want clarity on where they are, but that was hard to describe exactly where we wanted to finish. There was no use putting road position numbers because they're meaningless.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, then Mrs Trumper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I found the wording in the report tricky to get your head around, but it was very clear on the map on page 38 what the situation would be there. Madam Chair, my question was going to be, and I think Peter's answered it, is around the scraps of 70k that are left behind, and I think of the one in Tarawera Road that just goes up to Forest Place, which is probably less than a kilometre as well before you go to 80. So I think the answer is the next round, and that'll be 3 years' time, is that correct?
Yeah, well, it can be any time, but because it's quite an involved process, we've traditionally done it about at 3-year intervals. But yes, I would suggest that all our residual 70s be looked at in the next round.
Yes, I think that's something that NZTA was hoping that we would, over time, deal with, wasn't it? Mm.
Well, yes, and they want us to go back to them with a plan,
That's
if you
right.
like, to phase out existing 70s. Of course, they've got a lot more 70s than us. I don't know how they're going to phase out theirs.
Thank you. Mrs. Trumper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just got a couple of, I suppose, if you could clarify Vaughan Road. The submitter wanted a section of Vaughan Road to be included. Is that included? Because I don't know the road at all. I'm just making sure that it was considered and is included.
That little bit of Vaughan Road between the industrial area where Infocora and the developments at the northern end. The original proposal that we came to you with was just really extending the 50 in the areas that have been developed in the last 3 or 4 years. There was one submission that suggested that the residual bit in the middle, which does have paddocks on each side and is open, but it's relatively short, just make that 50 any rate, because it just left this silly little bit of 70, which was inconsistent with what NZTA wanted, and as I say, a small section, and it just made a lot of sense to just make the whole road as 50.
And especially if with the 4-laning, that's going to make sure that it's well in place before people start using Vaughan Road. Yeah. Okay, so that was question one. The other one was to do with the Rotorua Police's sort of recommendation of looking at the Hemo Road down to the industrial block at Peka. Is there any thought or any progress on reducing the speed leaving town or altering the passing lane and the considerable number of near misses with trucks turning into that industrial site?
Yes, so, well, again, that's a state highway, and NZTA are looking at that State Highway 30, State Highway 5 intersection, Waipa intersection area. Not quite sure what progress they've been making. Stavros might know, but I know they're looking at it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just one more point. I hope it's a lot quicker than they are doing the Waitapu Loop section.
Well, again, that's with them. We did, as you know, we wanted to include that with this process, and they were keen for a while, but then pulled out. So I'm not sure where they're at with that.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder, please, for the motion that the committee recommends to Council that the following changes to speed limits on the following roads are made in accordance with the requirements of the rule Setting of Speed Limits 2017. Now, they're all up there on the overhead, so I won't read them out separately. And it's been moved by Councillor Gould, seconded by Mrs. Trumper. Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Spatial plan, decision making.
Madam Chair, just please note I took no part in that.
Thank you. Yes, it'll be so noted. Thank you. It's on page 54. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, spatial plan decision making? I'll put my... Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Kemp. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Kia ora. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. We've just got Portia to take us through a presentation, and Sean Callis and I will just be available to answer off any questions. So I'll just hand across to Portia.
Thank you.
Good morning. So I'd like to just take you back a little bit as to some of the detail around how we got here today, because the process has been quite a long one and quite detailed. So I'll just take you back over some of that detail. So just some of that information around what a spatial plan is. So there is no real set understanding or definition of what a spatial plan is at the moment in New Zealand, except for this is the one that the Auckland Council adopted with their spatial plan. So what was important in this sentence here is around the economic, social, environmental and physical and cultural trends must be taken into consideration. that it's not just a land use plan or growth area for our city, that it covers quite a range of topics and subjects. So going back to where it fits into the scheme of our documents and our visioning and our framework is that the Vision 2030 that was undertaken and refreshed. Of course, we've got our annual plan every year that determines how we fund. Then the visioning exercise as to how the big moves and our goals and our key strengths fit into the bigger picture drops down into our portfolios. And then we've got our spatial plan, and the district plan will need to be amended as it goes through amendments. We'll take into consideration the spatial plan, and then of course the long-term plan as well. So the spatial plan is an overarching document that sits above many other multiple plans. So not just council plans, but also other agencies as well. So other agencies will look to our spatial plan to help them define where they need to grow as well. So, for example, the Ministry of Education will look at our spatial plan, see where we're looking to grow the city and the community and in what areas, and for their future planning they'll start to think, okay, if the city was to grow to this area, and considering our current catchments, we're going to need to think about additional schools in these locations. So that's just one example of where the spatial plan fits into a much bigger picture and how it informs other agencies' plans, but then also developers and gives them some information on where they expand, where we're expecting them to expand to as well. So what we did was, because we didn't quite know what growth looked like for our city and where our community wanted us to start looking at, we went out with a discussion document before even starting to think about a draft spatial plan. And that discussion document was very high level. It had some circles and some areas for growth. We did a lot of research and analysis in the background, but it said to the community, hey, this is what we're thinking of. What do you think? And it just kicked that discussion off and got everyone talking and having a good conversation within communities. So within those 6 weeks, we got around and did 56 workshops. We engaged with over 1,000 people, and that was some really good engagement around that discussion document. The feedback we got for that fed into the draft spatial plan. So once we got that draft spatial plan out in October of last year, we went back around for another round of consultation, again for 6 weeks, and we ended up holding that special consultative procedure as well with the World Cafe style of verbal feedback, but also people were able to come in and give you direct feedback as well. So what we did after that was we went back to Ree Anderson. So you'll remember Ree from last year when she came in and did some workshops with the initial, when we started the spatial plan process. So we went back to Ree Anderson and said, hey, can you have a look at some of the feedback we've received and go over some of that detail for us and make some summaries and recommendations from your opinion. So you'll remember Ree was the one who led the spatial plan in Auckland, so she has some really good background and really good skills and experience to bring to the process. Ree's report is attached to the appendix of my report as well. So out of, when we created the draft spatial plan, we said, right, it's not just about saying this is what our population could be and where we could grow it to. It's also about saying, who are we as a future community? What do we want our community to look like? What do we want to protect for our future generations? Where do we see ourselves in the future? So that's those objectives. So it was more around aspirational, what we want it to look like. So those were the 7 key objectives that the spatial plan was based around.
So in the draft district plan, we got a lot less, the draft spatial plan, we got a lot less feedback than we did around the consultation document. And that was because we had a lot of people saying, oh, okay, I see you've taken my comments into consideration. I don't need to submit. That's great. But we also got a lot of feedback saying that they supported some key themes that were coming through as well. And so these are the key themes that came through from that support. So great, we're happy to see that we're enabling iwi wellbeing and development. Our urban consolidation and containment is really important to us. We want to make sure we're not growing too much outside our city, but we're making sure that we've got those choices available. We're definitely making sure we're protecting our natural resources and our outstanding features. That infrastructure provision is really important to us. We need to make sure that that is well catered for so that we can provide for our growth, for our homes and our jobs. And that collaboration is really important, and we need to make sure that that continues ongoing after this process as well. There were some key themes around some of the suggested gaps as well. Now, some of these ones that are listed here are a lot more detailed than what you'd expect in a spatial plan. A spatial plan is really a high-level document. There was some detail in there, for example, acknowledging the rights of persons with disabilities. That's definitely something that we need to make sure we're continuing to do and ongoing, but it's probably something that's a little bit more detailed that needs to fit down into other plans. So what we've done with some of the suggested gaps around the more detail is forwarded that on to the relevant different departments to make sure that that is all incorporated going forward into infrastructure plans, for example. Some of the gaps that we missed are also really easy to tidy up in the final spatial plan as well. So there were some small wording changes that were requested from different individuals that we can easily tidy up. And some of that was just clarifying different meanings of different words. So really, when it came down to what were the two top issues that needed to be discussed today was, and those two key themes that were coming forward was around our population growth projections and assumptions and around the expansion out at Lake Okaraka. So just touching on the population growth and assumptions, and I have Sean here available for, he's the expert in this area, so he will probably tidy up some of my wording if I get any of this wrong. So, so just around the projections, I'll just help clarify that. Now, the projections, the detail that we put in the spatial plan was had a variety of audiences. We have the really technical people like the Regional Council and NZTA who want to get down into the real detail of it, and we have a lot more information that sits behind the spatial plan. And then we have our public who actually just want to read the document and get it and follow through and move on to the next subject kind of thing. So we were trying to cater for a variety of audiences and probably didn't hit the mark in some of the detail for some people. And what we're suggesting is to go back into the final spatial plan and put a little bit more detail in that around our growth assumptions. So just on this one, this graph shows that we've had a natural change that's been slowly declining over time. That natural change takes into consideration births and deaths. And as we are having smaller household units and smaller families, of course that's slowly declining over time. The net migration, while for the last 20 years has slowly been changing over time because we've got people leaving and not as many people returning, we've seen a significant change in that since 2013, and you can see that when you put that over a 20-year period, that growth change is actually quite significant. And this is one of the reasons why we've been identified as a medium growth area. So that's sort of the last 20 years or so of what we actually know. So when we come to projecting forward, of course we all don't know what the future looks like, but we can make some projections, and there are different agencies that make projections. So Stats NZ, what they do, their formula is they take your history and they basically take it forward. So what they've said is, okay, Rotorua, we see you've got some growth over the last few years, but we consider that just to be a bit of an anomaly, and we predict that you'll return to a decline in the future. And you can see there those growth projections. There are a real variety there in different scenarios. So the other way of projecting population is around growth, economic growth and jobs. So if you were to provide for a certain amount of jobs, with jobs come families, and that predicts your future. So some of that was around the Burl analysis that was done a few years ago. And so if you see these growth scenarios here, you can see we're actually already tracking at the moment on the strategy stretch. So and that's the top orange one. So that's what our growth in the last few years is projecting if we were to stay on that trend line. So what we did with the spatial plan was, okay, we don't know what the future is going to look like at all, but if we were to get to 100,000, and we don't know when that's going to happen, so we haven't put a time frame on it, if we were to get to 100,000, what would we like our city to look like? And it's not aspirational, it's not a figure that we're saying this is what we're aiming for. It's a figure that says, this, if we have this number, what if we were to get there? Where would we like our city to grow to? What would we like our city to look like?
No, continue, thank you.
Now this is a bit of a diagram that came out of the National Policy Statement of Urban Development Capacity. So they put this diagram out, and I think it's a really good representation of why you need to make sure that you've got enough land available for growth. So what they say is the blue one is you've got a certain amount of capacity that you've planned for. But in reality, you've got a certain amount that you can serve by infrastructure. So that's going to cut your available capacity down by about half. Then you've got, once you go into some of that detail, you might find out that site might not work in reality commercially. So the developers may start to cut out a certain amount and say, actually, this is what's commercially feasible. And then you've got what actually occurs. So it's a lot less than what we've actually seen or what we've planned for, which is why you've got to make sure that we've planned for enough. So we've got that available. What the urban development, what the National Policy Statement says is actually you've got to plan for 20% more than that blue plan-enabled capacity, because you've got to have that amount ready. So why have we gone for that higher growth figure of that 100,000 is, so the NPS says we've got to go 20% more. We've got land that has a lot of natural hazards to deal with. We're not just dealing with everyday sort of easy to develop flat land. We've got SNAs to protect, and we've got a protected caldera rim as well. We've got large amount of land and iwi ownership, which may not be able to be turned into freehold land. We've got a limited number of landowners as well that we're discussing with. We've got limited number of growth areas. We've got that need for choices for when people relocate to our city or when they come back home. We need to make sure we've got those choices available for them. So should they want to live in the city? Should they want to be rural? Should they want to be living at the lakes? And then we've also got those drivers of change. So we've got that triangle that we're working within. We've seen that growth out of Hamilton. We're seeing that growth out of Tauranga. And we're saying we want to be prepared and ready should that growth occur. So today you've got the 3 options for consideration. So the option 1 is, which is just retain the current provisions for growth in the draft spatial plan. We've got the option 2 is to retain the current provisions but actually provide some more clarity, and we can put a lot more detail in there that will help people understand as to why we've put the 100,000 in there, and that's our recommended option. And option 3 is to adopt the Stats NZ medium growth scenario, where the growth is considered just an anomaly and that will return to 0%. So that, personally, in my opinion, is not something we should be planning for, because that could potentially set us down a path where we're not prepared for that growth. So, Madam Chair, would you like to deliberate now?
Yes, thank you, because I know some councillors have held their questions until you're finished, so thank you for that, councillors. I'll take the questions now, and yes, Mr. Berriman-Kemp. Thank you, Dave.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your report, and thank you for the presentation, which was excellent and easy to follow. Actually, my question predominantly gets back into one of the what surprised me a little bit in the report was that there were 2 strategic issues. One was the population growth, and I understand that. The second one was the moving of Lake Raukawa-Tait development from now to next, which actually I must admit I interpreted as a strategic issue for Rotorua. That didn't seem to me to be a huge one. And I was here for the presentations, and I heard the passion, and I got that. So I took that as meaning it's more of a strategic issue for the spatial plan. Right, cool. My question is, if we do move that from now to next, what impact potentially does that have on iwi development, which of course is one of the enablers that you're meant to have within the spatial plan? And actually one of the things we were just discussing, your point about multiple Māori-owned land and iwi land might in some ways constrain development. Again, it's a moot point, because for papakainga housing, actually that could gain development. And I guess as a working scenario, if it is agreed to move the Lake Raukawa-Tait development from now to next, what impact and what conflict could that present in terms of iwi development in that area itself and in the development of papakainga housing?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have a whole section on the Lake Raukawa-Tait coming up next. Yeah, so I can take you through a lot more detail around that one. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms Mohi, thank you.
Kia ora, thank you for your report today. I've probably got a couple of questions here, just in terms of the gaps in the spatial plan identified in some of the submissions, and particularly the recognition of climate change impacts going forward, water conservation and the geothermal development. I note some of the submissions refer to water metering as an option in terms of water conservation. However, what I'm not clear about from this report is how those gaps are being responded to or being filled through these submissions. That's one. And the population growth scenarios. So the options offered on page 57, in my view, don't really look like options. Really, you know, there's not a lot of difference. It's just saying, or just leave it as it is, or add an explanation. But I don't see that as options. So my question is, the reports that have been relied on for the population estimates, there's the Bell report and the other economic, I think it's the business economic report, and then the New Zealand stats scenarios, and they're both quite one polar opposite, pretty much. My question is there any other statistical research or any independent research available out there other than these internal reports or the stats New Zealand reports that can be used to give some other scenarios of growth to consider, for us to consider? That's it. Kia ora.
I'll just start off on this one, and then Portia might just be able to add to it. I think it comes back to where this document has to be pitched. So if you recall, one of the things that we're looking to strengthen is some of those objective statements. So some of the issues that have been raised about geothermal, about water conservation, about the importance of our environment, and some of those areas are where we talk about the high-level objective statements. This is not the decision-making document about deciding whether people should have meters on water supplies. So I think we've got to keep the view that this document is about a long-term direction, which is a greater emphasis on the sustainability and the protection of our environment. So that's one of those key objectives. So that's where we start picking up on that detail, and also highlighting those key issues that people have said. Part of that is also to think about where water fits within that, land use, climate change, and the sustainable use of our resources. So we've got to talk in that way, that's where that discussion has to be had at this level, just at that high level direction piece as it relates to Vision 2030. The brass tacks level is when we get down to that next set of details about how we translate that into the Lakes A Zone review, how we translate that into some of our infrastructure strategies and bringing those environmental outcomes through into those hard decisions about where that means we go on a whole bunch of those infrastructural investments, our performance standards, all those things sort of flow on from this. So this is not the document to detail what those are or predetermine them, but just to set that view that this is the community's view that we need to go in those sort of directions and strengthen that wording around those objectives, and then we get down to the brass tacks level of subsequent decisions. So I'm not saying that it means then we've got an overall direction and we're not taking it piecemeal, but we do have to make different decisions at different times with different objectives. So hopefully that covers off that question. The second one around the population projection material. Look, the Regional Council did a whole bunch of work early on when they were considering a bay-wide study, and you will have heard us talk to the Natalie Jackson or the NIDIA report. Now that really looked at global trends, national trends, and really extrapolated that down into the Bay of Plenty as well. But the focus there was very much on the natural replacement rates. So you ended up with that births versus deaths, and so that little line that you see wiggling along the top where New Zealand and the world's replacement numbers are declining, and so you see that sort of come down. The other piece that they simply brought into that was the net migration history. So you ended up with a view that a number of projections started picking up on that history and gave some granularity around that natural replacement. Separate to that was the discussion around the X factor, and the X factor for us is the district an attractive place to live and relocate to? So there's a lot of research around lifestyle choices and people selecting areas to live. And again, that relates to the complexity around different working styles, and that's some of that starts getting into the speculative, but there's a lot of research in that kind of space. The last one, which we put a lot of emphasis on, was the Burl one. So Burl looked at the X factor was job creation. So what is happening with industrial, commercial, retail, tourism growth, and they started extrapolating out for us some scenarios where if there was investment in the economic development and continued growth, that would equal jobs, and then we did some work with Burl to say jobs equal people and people relocating families. So that was how we got some of those scenarios there. So the X factor for us has been, in our head, limited to that job creation space, and that gave us our difference. So rather than just seeing an exercise where we look back at the history and then extract forward, which Stats New Zealand does every couple of years, they update their extrapolations. We've tried to say that is the main factor. A lot of them are assumptions and speculative, but we'll take the Burl study as giving us an upper end. So that's where we've gone replacement, Stats New Zealand, and then jobs give us the final piece of that puzzle. There's more work we could do, but I think with all of these things, it's how much more detail will you really get from looking at some of that research. So I think the real litmus test for us is, and we've said this back to the Regional Council and NZTA, regular monitoring says what's happening, and we just keep tracking on that basis. So apology, that is a long answer to what is quite a complicated
Good.
Discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I firmly support option 2. my question, JP, are you saying that NZTA and Bay of Plenty Regional Council are still pushing the NIDIA projection, or have they resolved from that?
So since we got the feedback from NZTA and the Regional Council and the draft spatial plan, we went and met with them individually and took them through the data and the analysis that were done, and also around the 10-year growth assumptions that were done for the long-term plan as well. And just took them through a lot more of the detail that I think they were looking for, and they're feeling a lot more comfortable now. So we received a letter from the Regional Council yesterday saying that yes, we support your draft spatial plan and we understand the 10-year and 30-year growth assumptions, and they still have some reservations that we are they're just a bit concerned that about the costs around putting the infrastructure in, but I've just gone back to them and said, you know, we are going to release land as and when needed as we continue to monitor and assess and understand where we need that growth to happen, and the infrastructure will follow or make sure that that infrastructure is in place for that growth, not to plan for the infrastructure for the whole growth, not knowing where we're going in the future. So.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like Councillor Dave, I fully support option 2. But you mentioned that the population growth isn't aspirational, we're just